This is America at 250. Due Diligence.
The power of war.
The smoke of the revolution had barely cleared. The United States of America, having wrestled its liberty from the British Empire, could now look outward. But freedom on land did not guarantee freedom at sea. American merchantmen in the Mediterranean found themselves in the sights of the Barbary corsairs.
Presidents George Washington and John Adams paid tributes in gold, timber, and gunpowder to North African royals in Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli to keep American sailors out of irons.
But in 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli demanded a staggering increase, a king's ransom of $225,000 from the newly inaugurated Thomas Jefferson. The U.S. president refused to empty the national coffers to pay off pirates. The Pasha responded with a declaration of war and chopped down the flagstaff at the American consulate in Tripoli.
Soon came the baptism of fire for the small and untested American Navy. In 1803, when the frigate USS Philadelphia chased a corsair into uncharted waters, it ran aground and was captured. 300 American sailors were thrown into dungeons.
A ragtag force of 8 U.S. Marines and hundreds of Greek and Arab mercenaries, led by a diplomat and self-appointed general, William Eaton, would then march for 6 weeks, covering 500 miles across blistering desert sands. Eaton's men were starving, parched, and near mutiny by the time they reached the coastal fortress.
Amidst the roar of naval bombardment, the Marines stormed the battlements, and for the first time in history, the Stars and Stripes were raised in victory over foreign soil.
Eaton wanted to march on Tripoli and free the American captives, but the top U.S. diplomat in the region, Tobias Lear, in 1806, acting under broad instructions of President Jefferson and Secretary of State James Madison, negotiated a prisoner exchange, plus a $60,000 ransom to secure a peace treaty with the Pasha.
Jefferson's political rivals, the Federalists, fiercely attacked the treaty, but the Senate eventually ratified it.
For generations to come, more American presidents would have to balance the sword, the pen, and public opinion.
More than 200 years later, the question Thomas Jefferson faced off the coast of Tripoli still has not been settled. Who decides when the United States goes to war?
The Constitution deliberately divides that power. Congress declares war and pays for it. The President commands the armed forces. On this edition of America at 250 Due Diligence, the power of war, how that division worked at the beginning, how it changed, and how much of it remains today.
I'm Bill Bernardoni.
And I'm Steve Herman.
To take us back to the beginning, we turned to a journalist who spent 24 years as a reporter and editor for the Associated Press before digging into one of the first overseas wars fought by the new American Republic.
Joseph Whelan is the author of Jefferson's War, America's First War on Terror, 1801 to 1805. Joe, Welcome to America at 250. Joe, set the stage for us. 1801, a brand new country. There are pirates on the far side of the world that are seizing American ships of this young republic and actually ransoming Americans into slavery. Just how bad had it gotten for the United States?
Pretty bad. The United States had been protected by Great Britain until the Revolutionary War. And after the war, they discovered that they would have to pay tribute to the Barbary states. And I think John Adams inquired how much that would be, and it was way beyond what the means they had available. They had no tax at that time under the Articles of Confederation except the postage stamp. That was it. And so they met with Tripolitan, who told them they had to pay something like $20-some thousand.
Who was Tripolitan?
Tripoli, yeah.
Okay.
They met with a representative from Tripoli in London, and that's what he said. They required $20,000, and for perpetuity, it would cost $150,000 or something like that. And of course, there was no money available. So the answer was they couldn't do anything. And this was in the 1780s. And so Adams and Jefferson were friends, and they debated what they should do. Adams said they should pay the tribute. Jefferson said they should build a navy and protect the ships. And it was just a rhetorical question at that time because there was no money and neither of them was president or anything. But when Jefferson became president in 1801, first thing that he did was to order a squadron to go to the Mediterranean to protect American ships because they were being seized by the Barbary pirates and the sailors were being ransomed or sold into slavery. And the Barbary states had a huge slave auction going in Algiers. So over a period of time, something like 200,000 people were sold into slavery. It was pretty serious. But at that time...
So in Africa, just to be clear, at this point, the beginning of the 19th century, Africans had Americans, white Americans, as slaves.
That's right, yeah. Americans and people from Great Britain. The corsairs from the Barbary states would raid along the coasts of England, Ireland, in Europe. They really went after Spain a lot. It was pretty bad. Their power was starting to wane at that time. But the European powers continued to pay tribute because it excluded the competitors from smaller countries because they couldn't afford it. So things rocked along that way until the United States decided to go and protect their own ships and not pay tribute.
The tribute stops, and the Pasha of Tripoli was not pleased, I take it.
No, he declared war by having the American flag chopped down, the flagpole, and that was the way they declared war. And so for a while, not much happened, although there was a clash between the USS Enterprise and a ship from Tripoli, and the ship from Tripoli was just shredded, and they killed most of the sailors on the ship, demasted it. It was really a debacle for the Tripoli sailors and their ship. But not much happened after that. Jefferson, the United States, kind of formed a coalition with Italy, Sicily, and Great Britain even helped by supplying ports like at Malta and Gibraltar. But they didn't send warships to fight with the Americans. So in all, there were 5 squadrons, Mediterranean squadrons, that were sent by Jefferson between 1801 and 1805. And not much happened. I mean, there were some real setbacks along the way. At one point, the USS Philadelphia ran aground in the Tripoli harbor. They lost over 300 sailors. They were captured and put in prison in Tripoli. And they had to be eventually ransomed when the war ended. But eventually, they got a Commodore that Jefferson really liked, Edward Preble, and his squadron sailed into Tripoli Harbor and fully engaged. The Tripoli Navy and Army had marshaled 25,000 troops around the city, Tripoli. Preble sailed into the harbor with his little squadron. One of them was the USS Constitution, and they shelled the city. They came back like 5 times, and they destroyed a lot of shipping there. But still, it was indecisive. It didn't turn the tide. The head of the Tripoli government did not want to negotiate or anything, a treaty, anything like that. So there was a fellow by the name of William Eaton. He was a former Army officer, and he went to Jefferson, and he said he wanted to lead an army into Tripoli, but he needed some financial backing and weapons and everything. So they met. There are no notes taken of the meeting, but afterwards, Eaton got 1,000 muskets and $20,000 budget and a new title, Navy Agent for the Barbary Regencies. He was kind of Jefferson's last hope. Preble just hadn't been able to force the USAF to make peace, and his successor became ill. So Eaton went to Alexandria, Egypt, and he met with Tripoli's exiled ruler, Hamet. They recruited an army there, 400 European mercenaries, Arabs, Tripoli dissidents. There were only 10 Americans, and that counted Eaton. The rest of them were U.S. Marines under Presley Bannon, pretty famous in the Marine Corps, Presley O'Bannon.
Well, I know where this is going because the Marine Corps hymn talks about the shores of Tripoli, right?
Exactly, yeah. That's where that came from. So in March 1805, they set out across the Libyan desert with this force. And they had many problems, food shortages, mutinies by some of the mercenaries and Arabs, bad water, heat. But eventually, after about 50 days, they covered the 520 miles to the city of Derna, which was the second largest city in Tripoli. And they got there 2 days ahead of a Tripolitan army that had set out from Tripoli. And so they were there 2 days early. They set up in the city. They captured the city. And they sent Eaton sent a note to the governor of the city. It was his name, Mustafa Bey. He was the third highest ranking official in the Regency of Tripoli. Requested passage through Derna and provisions for the expedition. And the answer was, Mustafa scrawled his answer on the message, and it said, "My head or yours." And Jefferson never asked Congress to declare war.
You mentioned that this was actually quite popular, and I'm very keen to know how this information got back. I don't think we had AP war correspondents quite yet.
Not yet.
But you mentioned it was popular, so how did Congress respond to it?
They supported it. Newspapers followed every development in the war. They were getting interviews with all these squadron commanders that would come back, and the government was telling them what was going on. It was popular. And Congress agreed to finance the war, impose this Mediterranean fund tax to raise money for it. It was like a 2.5% import tax. Proceeds paid for new warships and gunboats and that sort of thing. So there's really no opposition. There's no friction during this time. Interestingly, the Mediterranean squadron, the squadrons, got the nickname of the Nursery of the Navy because it was the first time really that some of these officers had been seasoned in combat. And they were known as Preble's boys, and they ended up becoming the captains that would command the ships during the War of 1812. Some of them quite famous, actually.
But our Navy at that point, you say Nursery of the Navy, the Royal Navy was still the Navy out there at the time. Perhaps the French and Spanish were also pretty good as well. What were they thinking when they saw this upstart country, taking on the pirates while they sat and watched?
They were, I think, emboldened a little bit to break out of the tribute. Algiers was still very powerful. They were the predominant Barbary state. And they were still trying to, while the United States refused to pay tribute to Tripoli, they were still paying tribute to Algiers under this existing treaty from the Adams administration. And during the War of 1812, Algiers expelled the U.S. consul, seized American trading ships, thinking Britain would win the war. But then after the war ended, 5 days after that, the United States declared war on Algiers. And in June 1815, 9 warships under Stephen Decatur reached the Mediterranean, and within days, the squadron had defeated 2 Algerian warships and killed the Grand Admiral.
So that was a formal declaration of war.
Oh, it was, yes. Yes, Algiers.
Is it fair to say that the modern authorization, the AUMF, instead of declaration, is born right here at one of the very first conflicts fought after the creation of the country?
Yes, I would say so. I don't think we declared war on anybody until we declared war on Algiers, 1815. Never declared war on Tripoli. In Tunis, we reached an agreement with them, and Morocco was kind of out of it at that point. But Algiers was the major power, and they had the big slave mart in Algiers. So they declared war on Algiers.
11 declarations of war over 5 different wars and none since June of 1942. That last one, by the way, added Axis-aligned nations Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania to the Second World War enemies list. What do you reckon Thomas Jefferson, who wanted this power solely in the hands of Congress, not presidents, would make of our modern situation?
I don't know if you would be surprised. He was not averse to exerting his presidential powers to maintain his power as president. I mean, he financed opposition newspapers that smeared his political enemies. He did a lot of stuff like that he's not heralded for. He was a political operative. He was probably the first and best political operative this country had, but he's not generally viewed that way.
Jumping ahead now to Truman. Truman sends troops into Korea, never asks for congressional approval, calls it a police action under the UN. Was that the moment the dam broke, or did it break 100 years earlier, 150 years earlier? What do you think?
I would say it broke with Truman. There should have been a declaration of war against North Korea, although it was the United Nations action too, which complicated things a bit. So it was a coalition war in Korea with, half a dozen other countries trying to defend South Korea. So I don't think there's any thought of going to Congress and asking them to do something about that. And the same with Vietnam, too, really.
Truman had that precedent to point back to. Every president has seemingly pointed back to that Jefferson precedent. If Jefferson were around today, do you think he would, first of all, is that a fair reading? Do you think that's accurate? And second, do you think that if Jefferson were around today, that he would regret not going to Congress first because of how he has been used over the past 226 years since this occurred?
He might regret that, especially today when the United States has attacked a country that had not attacked the United States. There's really no underlying reason to do that, and the reasoning kept shifting, by the week. So it was a different situation entirely. He was just trying to protect American trade in the Mediterranean. They needed to trade in the Mediterranean. It was a lucrative trade that they conducted there. And he had argued for years that they needed to build a navy and just go in there and fight the Barbary states if they needed to.
So Congress passed the War Powers Resolution in 1973 to claw the presidential power back, and Presidents of both parties have essentially worked around it ever since. Why do you think Congress is never really the executive branch on this?
On that issue, I don't know. I think they're afraid of public reaction. Public might, they think, greatly approve of what they're doing. And they don't want to act as a brake on it and appear as an opponent to what is happening. Although all they would do is exert their authority under the Constitution. But what if they held a vote to declare war and it failed? Like could happen today, maybe not. So why risk it? Risk averse.
Joseph Whelan, author of Jefferson's War.
Thomas Jefferson's campaign against Tripoli established an early pattern. The president directed the fighting, Congress knew what he was doing and paid for it, and no formal declaration of war followed.
That left the constitutional power divided, but it also showed how easily authorization could be inferred rather than stated. Coming up next on America at 250 Due Diligence, retired Brigadier General Ernie Audino.
This is America at 250 Due Diligence. Here's Steve Herman and Bill Bernardoni.
A century and a half after Tripoli, the constitutional process produced its clearest modern example.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Franklin Roosevelt asked Congress to recognize that a state of war existed between the United States and Japan.
The Senate voted 82-0. The House voted 388-1. It is the cleanest modern example of the President and Congress exercising the war power together.
It is also one of the last.
General Ernie Audino starts from that same constitutional division but reaches a broader view of presidential authority. His argument is that the commander-in-chief decides when American forces enter combat, while Congress retains the power to declare war, raise the military, and stop paying for a conflict it opposes.
Brigadier General Ernie Audino served as executive assistant to the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and spent a year embedded as a combat advisor to Kurdish Peshmerga forces in Iraq. General, welcome to America at 250 Due Diligence.
General, you're widely described as the only American general officer to have spent a full year embedded in the field with Kurdish Peshmerga forces. First of all, explain to us who are the Kurds, what is the Peshmerga forces, why you were there, and what you did.
There was no war against al-Qaeda without the Kurds, period, exclamation point. There was no war against ISIS without the Kurds, period, exclamation point. So who are the Kurds? They've been described as the largest nation without a country of their own, without a sovereign country of their own. And, after the Treaty of Versailles and then the Treaty of Sèvres, which divided up the Ottoman Empire, and everyone, was promised their own country. And the Kurds were too, right? But there was a caveat for the Kurds, and it was that a Kurdish state had to be, I guess, ratified in Ankara, of all places. And so it was a Treaty of Lausanne, I think, in 1923, where that was rejected. And so the Kurds ended up without a state of their own. They're split across Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, the largest populations in southeastern Turkey now, maybe 20 million. There's probably 4 million, 5 million, 5 million in Iran, 8 million or so in Iraq, and another 3 or 4 million in Syria. And they're just remarkable people.
You served as executive assistant to vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And from that vantage point, when senior civilian and military leaders considered using military force, what did that decision-making process generally look like?
Well, I mean, that decision is really a political decision, whether we go to war. And, I was just having a conversation with an old friend of mine who retired as a lieutenant general, and this guy was one of our war-fightingest generals, just a great guy, a warrior scholar, somebody I have great respect for. And he was telling me when he was in Afghanistan, commanding some serious operations over there, he was visited by some folks from Washington, and they asked him, "So, General, so why do you think we're fighting?" And he goes, "Well, I was hoping you could tell me, because that's the truth, right?" So the deliberation is not so much whether we should fight. That's not really the deliberation of the Pentagon. That's how we should fight. That's how we should fight. Whether we should fight, that's a political decision.
How do you, in your own estimation, consider conversations around war powers and the fact that war powers resolution from Congress and approval has happened 11 times over 5 wars? The last time was, I believe, June 2nd, 1942. How do you consider Congress's use in this and the fact that since June 2nd, 1942, technically Congress has never declared war? Does that bother you in any way, or from a military perspective, it is what it is and you don't really think about that?
Well, listen, none of us want to go to fight unless the nation wants to fight. Okay. I mean, that's at rock bottom. And when we're told to fight, we do. We're soldiers. Okay. And we need, the nation needs the domestic support behind that. But it doesn't just happen by magic. Okay. It is a function of the value of the objective. That's where it all begins. Karl von Clausewitz, the most influential theorist on warfare in the Western Hemisphere, wrote On War in 1830 or so. Man, that guy was on it. And, he said it's the value of the objective that determines the magnitude and the duration of any war any nation will wage in its pursuit. Amen. Exactly right. We kind of got into this a second ago. But when it comes to the actual decision to send U.S. troops into hostile action, some human being has to make that decision. And our Constitution, our nation's owner's manual, as I like to say, gives that authority, delegates it to one person, the commander-in-chief, and that's the president. Article 2, Section 2 of our Constitution.
There is a tradition that, at the very least, the administration and the Pentagon go to some of the members of Congress who have the clearances to brief them. And there have been complaints in recent years that that's not happening. Do you think it's just because the commander-in-chief doesn't want to, or there are concerns about leaks? What's your read on what has changed?
I am 1,000% on the side of preventing leaks. Nowhere in the Constitution is there a notification requirement. Find it. Find the notification requirement. It is not there. But Congress put one into the War Powers Resolution, War Powers Act. It's a 48-hour. You telling the president, a co-equal branch of government, telling him, hey, you have to let us know within 48 hours. Okay. I mean, every president has done that. Okay. But They really don't have to. I mean, someday this is going to go to the Supreme Court, I think, and it's going to be found unconstitutional.
What's your experience having worked with administrations on both sides of the aisle as to the difference between how different administrations, Democrat and Republican, handle this issue? Have handled this issue in years, over your almost 30 years?
I've never really thought of it that way in terms of parties.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't. I've watched during Operation Allied Force in Serbia, Yugoslavia. Remember back in 1999, I think I was in the Senate at the time as an Army Congressional Fellow. This was fascinating to watch this. I literally got called in to the member's office because I was the only military guy. Hey, Ernie, Senator McCain is pushing for a declaration of war. What do you think? I'm a major. What do I think? All right. But the point was, at that time, McCain, and I understood his point. To this day, I feel the same way. There was no vital national interest of the United States that was put at risk, despite of all the cheerleading and the hysterics coming out of European allies that, oh my gosh, the sky is going to fall. None of them stepped up to the plate to do a darn thing. It was the United States that did.
If you have a president who repeatedly is launching military action, and you have a significant percentage of the population, or even the majority, and members of Congress who say, look, this is an action that's happening that's not in the national interests. Besides Congress threatening to cut off the money, what can be done to stop a president in that situation?
I don't think there is any formal mechanism for that. We wait for vote them out, I guess, when the time comes. But our nation's owner's manual hasn't given us another way.
Should there be something?
That's not for me to say.
Well, when there's opposition to executive branch action in other arenas, Congress does have powers to investigate. You can go to court and see if the judicial branch will stop it. So it does work in other areas.
Okay, those are other areas. But in here we have a clear delegated sole constitutional authority to commit troops to combat. Unless you have a constitutional amendment, nothing else is going to be able to do it.
Whether it was during your time in uniform or before, is there any one particular presidential blunder with ordering military force to be used or not to be used that stands out in your mind?
Oh, my goodness gracious. The classic one has to be Vietnam. It has to be Vietnam. And it starts at the top because the first order question always must be, and a few presidents do this, few of them do it, but that question has to be asked. What is our political objective? That drives everything because war is politics by extreme measure. Okay, so where we consider politics politics really is the world's system of nonviolent conflict resolution. It's a spectrum from pure reason to pure violence. And so on one side, the pure reason side, that's where we debate and argue, and every single legislature in the world. This is every issue that comes for a vote is a potential fight, but we don't fight, right? We vote. And somebody goes away winning and somebody goes away with hurt feelings, but no one's shooting at each other. But sometimes the limits of reasoned debate are reached and people are still not satisfied and the first bullet starts flying.
What do you think was going through Johnson's mind at that time for the reasoning he decided to enter?
Yeah, here's the thing. So was the question to contain Soviet or Chinese communism? A lot of people thought it was. Was it to defeat the North Vietnamese army? Because a lot of people thought it was. Was it to defeat an insurgency? The Viet Cong? Was it to defend South Vietnam? These are important questions. They're not trivial. They mean something in terms of the military calculus to accomplish it. So it's not all the same thing. So if we are unclear of the political objective, everything that nests to it can't nest to it. No matter what is achieved on the battlefield, it'll never close that political gap at the end and reach political success. So there was a guy, Colonel Harry Summers. He wrote a great book on strategy, critical analysis of the Vietnam War. Superb, absolute great book. He was on the ground in 1975 in Vietnam at a bilateral meeting with North Vietnamese, and he asked his counterpart, NVA counterpart, I mean, he didn't ask, he said, hey, you never beat us on the battlefield. And his NVA counterpart paused for a second, and then he replied, well, that is true, but it's also irrelevant.
To what extent did Korea justify going into Vietnam? There were parallels. Literally, you had a South and a North. The North were the bad guys. The South was nominally allied with us. Truman didn't declare war. The Congress didn't declare war. It was called a police action. And there was no single day when it was called the Vietnam War, but it sort of creeped along, starting, I mean, arguably even, Eisenhower had an involvement, but John Kennedy did as well, sending in so-called advisors. And so what I see is some semantics here that can be dangerous. Police action, advisors. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah. Well, you're not far off the mark, because the big semantic issue was the term limited war. So after World War II and, our deployment of 2 nuclear weapons, that became what total war was. We thought that's total war. We want to avoid that. Well, populations have been waging total war to that point, committing everything to it, and anything was a target to that point until the nuclear weapon. Well, once a nuclear weapon arrived, now we decided that's total war. Everything else has to be limited war. And so we literally, in Vietnam, took some lessons out of North Korea, okay? We brought them into the fight in Vietnam, and it led to these crazy theories of that war is to negotiate, and that no, war is to break the enemy's will to fight. So we violently impose a nation's will on another nation. That's it. That's been the basic definition since Christ was a corporal. And the basic recipe for accomplishing that is by killing people and breaking stuff. Right? It's a simple recipe. But we told ourselves, okay, in a limited war, it's a war to negotiate. And we came up with these crazy theories of, one was like, these economic theories of war that led to this notion of graduated response. Doesn't that sound smart sounding? Oh, graduated response, where we're going to signal to the enemy that we're really serious, right? No, it signaled just the opposite, that we didn't have the will to win. We wanted to just negotiate.
Well, now how do you feel about putting war in the hands of artificial intelligence? Because that seems to be where we're headed.
Well, see, that's the thing. You're right. I mean, you're talking now about the changing character of war. The nature of war remains the same as it always has been, a violent clash of people's will, right? But the character of war, how we fight it, that changes from age to age. There was a time when we fought with farm implements and knives and axes, and then gunpowder was discovered or invented, and then we were able to make bombs and cannons, and then bullets, and then repeating weapons and machine guns, and then mechanize it, and we were able to mass produce armies, and then aircraft.
Mass kill them.
Yeah, and then there was nuclear weapons and cyber war and information operations and psyops. You know what? And I'm telling you what, as we get deeper into the 21st century, the information age, we are clearly, and this is to take a term from the Tofflers who wrote War and Anti-War, it's absolutely clear to me that we wage war as we wage wealth. We're in the information age now. Think of, how that contributes to the economy. We are employing those same capabilities on the battlefield today. And autonomous systems creates a particular problem. They depend on all this information age stuff, but they're beginning to make decisions. And here's where we as a country, a people, are going to have to put some thought into this and gain some comfort. At some point, there will be no human in that final kill chain decision, to determine a very specific matter of life and death. Do we kill this guy or not? And that becomes a decision or trigger made by a machine.
So does the AI get to outvote the commander-in-chief?
We'll find out.
U.S. Army retired Brigadier General Ernie Audino.
The general's position is emphatic. The commander-in-chief controls the fight while Congress decides whether the country will continue to pay for it.
And his challenge to lawmakers is just as direct. If Congress opposes a war, it has to summon the courage to vote and use the power of the purse. Coming up next on America at 250 Due Diligence, former Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger.
Real questions, serious debate. This is America at 250, Due Diligence.
The clean division seen after Pearl Harbor became much harder to find less than a decade later, when President Harry Truman sent American forces into Korea without asking Congress for a declaration of war.
Under the flag of the United Nations, a unified command has been established for all forces of the members of the United Nations fighting in Korea. General Douglas MacArthur is the commander of this combined force. The prompt action of the United Nations to put down lawless aggression and the prompt response to this action by free peoples all over the world will stand as a landmark in mankind's long search for a rule of law among nations.
Truman described Korea as collective action under the United Nations flag. He never asked Congress to declare war, and Korea became the model for major undeclared conflicts that followed.
By Vietnam, Senator Wayne Morse was warning that war by executive decision left its purpose, scope, and prosecution to individual discretion.
War waged by administrative decision leaves every aspect of that war an arguable matter. Its purpose, its scope, as well as its day-to-day prosecution are left to individual discretion. All are subject to second-guessing and public dispute. The bombing of North Vietnam has been a good example of the inadequacy of administrative war. When we began bombing North Vietnam in February 1965, we attacked a country that had not attacked United States territory and which had no apparent intention of doing so.
Morse was one of only two senators to vote against the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964, the measure that gave Lyndon Johnson sweeping authority to escalate in Vietnam without a declaration of war.
Between Truman's claim of executive flexibility and Morse's warning about unchecked power is the practical question presidents and lawmakers still face. When can the president act alone, and when must Congress take responsibility?
Adam Kinzinger has seen that question from both sides. He flew combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan before serving 12 years in the House of Representatives, including on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Kinzinger, welcome to America at 250, Due Diligence. Adam, you flew combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan in the cockpit. Did the question of who back home authorized you to be there ever feel real? Or is that and at this point in your career, the politician's problem and not the pilot's in your case?
Yeah, I mean, like when I was actually flying the missions, no, I mean, we all believed in what we're doing. Obviously we can point back to what happened on 9/11, which is why a significant number of us joined in the first place. And, By the time I went to Iraq, I mean, I had done some stuff prior, but my big deployments in '08 and '09, I mean, we were clearly fighting an insurgency that had some very significant connections to Al Qaeda and, the folks that attacked us. So we never really got into the question of like war powers and politicians and stuff like that. We just wanted to go, fight on behalf of our country. And ultimately, even though we can argue whether or not Iraq shouldn't have happened, it probably shouldn't have, but I think it will be a country that in the long haul is better off than it was under Hussein. But we knew that we were there fighting for a good and just cause.
For the service members carrying out strikes right now, does it matter whether Congress voted, and should it matter?
Yeah, I think it should matter. And, this is actually kind of, I guess, it is unique, but this is the first time I've really heard some of my fellow service members who are still in pretty upset about this, pretty outraged, wondering. I think part of it is Pete Hegseth and kind of, showing off versus kind of a serious approach. I'm not sure if they're going to sit around and say, particularly Congress should have voted on this, although I've heard a few people say that. But there's just I think there's more of a sense that what's the mission here? What's the goal? We're actually seeing pilots, die in this. We're seeing American infrastructure get hit for the first time in a very long time. And I think that's bringing home a lot of the questions. It's like if you all of a sudden, you're not safe, you recognize there's a real threat to your life, I think those questions become far more important at that point.
From a warfighter's view, from that vantage point, what changes when American forces are committed to this, committed to Iran, committed back in after 9/11 to Iraq and Afghanistan, without the country being brought along first?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you're a warfighter, you have a mission. You're going to go do the mission. You're going to try to do it to the best of your ability on behalf of your country. But I can tell you, certainly we know when the country is on our side. And I think let's take two different perspectives of that. There's number one, does the country support the mission? Now, Iraq and Afghanistan, as it went on, you could certainly sense that less of the country was supportive of us being there versus do you support the military? One of the things I can always say is I've never had, except one time by some weirdo in Madison, Wisconsin, I've never had anybody see me in my uniform and say anything but, thanks for your service if they say something. And that's really important. But when the country, I think there's clearly, not just from the warfighter perspective, but from just the American people's perspective, you have to put effort in, unless it's a time-sensitive thing, you have to put effort into winning the American people over and selling the reason for it. If you think about George W. Bush, I mean, clearly 9/11 kind of sold it in and of itself, but he still addressed Congress. They still sent people out on the news to make the case for what would eventually be Iraq and things like that. That's extremely important because this is not the president's military. And this is one thing that I think military members do take very seriously, which is we are there to fight on behalf of the country in accordance with and to defend the Constitution of the United States. We're not there for Donald Trump or Barack Obama or George W. Bush. We're there for that. And unfortunately, I think in this case, the President of the United States gave the State of the Union a couple days prior to launching these strikes and really didn't give anything but kind of a cursory acknowledgement of, the fact that Iran is a challenge. And I think, frankly, the president missed a huge opportunity to win the American people over and I think really to sell the case to the warfighter. Now, again, military members are going to go out there. They're going to fight as hard as they can. They want to win. And I'll be honest, I really want them to win. But there is a huge benefit in bringing the American people along with you.
You sat on the Foreign Affairs Committee and dealt with military authorizations. Honestly, were you more inclined to give a president latitude or to rein one in?
I think in broad strokes, congressional authorization is important. So, if it's going to be a big war, if you can go to Congress and get that authorization, it's far better in the long run. But I also believe, look, I strongly believe that there is a the president of the United States has a lot of power when it comes to foreign policy. And the more and more our country is broken when it comes to Congress and Senate and our inability to find common ground or to think outside of our partisan boxes, the president's going to continue to seize more and more of that power. So you can't have 400, or including the Senate, 535 commanders in chief. You can only have one. So I think there's a lot of power. But on the broad strokes of, hey, we're thinking about going to war with Iran, for instance, I think there's extreme benefit to, even if you don't go for a full war authorization, because quite honestly, I always have wondered if they actually challenge the War Powers Act, is it constitutional? I don't know the answer to that. But to at least go, try to bring Congress along with you to make the case to them to sell it, to keep the big eight, the folks in charge of the Intel, Foreign Affairs, Armed Services Committee in touch is that's a bare minimum of what a president needs to do.
Is it tied back to the competence of Congress and competence of the Senate right now? Is that where, if there were more competent leaders in your estimation there on that side, where Congress had power that it had in previous decades and it's had over the past few decades, then maybe congressional authority would be more of a more necessary? Is that basically what you're saying?
Look, the president will seize, and this is not just Trump, this is any president, will seize as much power as Congress lets him take. Mm-hmm. Look, the founding fathers understood that there could be bad presidents that come along. But what they never predicted was a Congress that would so willingly give up its own seat at the table. I mean, the goal was to have these kind of silos or branches that fought jealously for their role in government. And what you have right now, just speaking honestly as somebody that was there for 12 years, I've never seen it like this, where a Congress would so willingly give up its own seat at the table, its own say. And so, I blame any time the president is taking authority reserved for Congress. Yes, you can blame the president for that, but really it's Congress that is not guarding its own ability to do this. I mean, look, Congress could clearly invoke the War Powers Act and pass it. What happened in the Senate recently, though, even Rand Paul, who claims to be this, I'm all about Congress's role in declaring war and X, Y, and Z, and he's voted for it every time except the one time his vote actually could have compelled the president of the United States to follow through. He abstained. And he claimed he did it to give the president greater leverage in negotiations. Fine. Okay, that's an okay position to take if you have done it consistently. What you instead see is a man that was putting his, out there being the reputation of the guy that's for the War Powers Act until he has the chance to actually do it. And then he backed down and gave that authority to the president of the United States. So what Donald Trump is doing on this specific issue isn't necessarily, this is him taking power Congress is letting him have.
After the June 2025 strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, you called the action a good call on the merits. Setting the merits aside, should a president have been able to make that decision without a vote from Congress?
I think you have to give the president that leverage. But again, ultimately, that question is answered by Congress, by what Congress is willing to do. And even if it's not through the War Powers Act, they can do things like limit where funding can go. They can use their power of the purse to compel decisions. And so, look, if we were debating here a full invasion of Iran, and an occupation of Iran, I personally clearly think that needs approval from Congress. That is obviously a declaration of war that, will involve America's sons and daughters and probably a number of them dying in that process. Something like a strike that may be a momentary thing or, last a day or two. I think the president needs to have leverage to be able to do that on their own. Now, we could, get even deeper and say, well, that could trigger a wider war. Yeah, all that is true. And that's where the War Powers Act comes in. It gives the president 60 days and then Congress has to make a decision. And so, yeah, I think ultimately, it's an art form. What is considered a declaration of war? What is considered a commander-in-chief, or simply a military action? And again, that is up to Congress and the president to decide. I think for like a strike against nuclear facilities, the president is pretty much able to do that on his own.
Two Republican senators, moving to Venezuela now, two Republican senators reverse their support for the Venezuela War Powers Resolution after receiving private assurances that American ground troops would not be sent, and the vice president then obviously broke the tie. Is a private promise from an administration an adequate substitute for Congress formally exercising power?
No, I mean, I've been in this game long enough to know that it's not a private assurance. It's usually just a way to give somebody an excuse to change their vote, right? I mean, let's look at what Bill Cassidy did from Louisiana recently. He stood up, he challenged the president. They got into a bit of a yelling match, and then magically he gets invited to the White House for, quote, the Situation Room, and then he comes back and switches his vote on the War Powers Act, claiming that he learned some things. And we can't follow up on that because we don't know what he learned. But I'm going to tell you, he didn't learn anything. He just was able now to kind of back down and win over the president of the United States. So again, it's really the question of where does Congress have to come in? Where is it the president? There's no cut and dry answer. Like I said, it's an art. It's something that goes through the political process. If Congress wants to step up and hold and regain and hang on to its power, it can do that. If it wants to roll over and let the president do whatever he wants, it can do that too. And that's kind of the moment that we're in right now.
Former Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger.
3 guests with distinct readings of the same constitutional division.
Joseph Whelan showed us the precedent. Jefferson went to war without a declaration, but Congress knew, appropriated the money, and allowed the campaign to continue.
General Audino defended that arrangement as the design, not a loophole. The president commands the fight, and Congress's real check is limited to the purse.
And former Congressman Adam Kinzinger gave the practical middle ground. Presidents need speed and leverage, but a lasting war cannot succeed unless Congress and the country are brought along.
From Tripoli to Korea, Vietnam, and a tied Senate vote over Venezuela, the formal declaration has largely disappeared. The responsibility has not.
The Constitution did not give the power of war to one branch. It divided the power so that no one could own the decision alone. That system works only when both branches are willing to own their part of it.
This has been America at 250, Due Diligence. I'm Steve Herman.
And I'm Bill Bernardoni. We want to thank our guests, former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, retired Army Brigadier General Ernie Audino, and author Joseph Whelan.
Send us your comments online at radiofreeamerica.media. That's radiofreeamerica.media. Executive producers of America at 250 Due Diligence are Steve Herman and Bill Bernardoni. Audio production by Bill Bernardoni of Bernardoni Media and Marketing. Support for the program comes from the Radio Free America Project and the Jordan Center for Journalism Advocacy and Innovation at the University of Mississippi School of Journalism and New Media. For more information, please visit newslab.org. Again, that's newslab.org.
Portions of this program are recorded at WUMS Radio in Oxford, Mississippi. For Steve Herman, I'm Bill Bernardoni. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time as we continue discussing the ideas and principles that shape America at 250.